Ladies and gentlemen, fellows and guests, welcome to the 132nd Rhind Lectures on this very special Royal Wedding Day. Now, it's customary at the beginning of all our Rhind Lectures to say a few words about the founder of the lecture series, that is Alexander Henry Rhind of Sibster. He endowed the lecture series, and we are very grateful indeed for his foresight in doing this. It's just one of the star attractions and achievements of this society. Alexander Henry Rhind was born in 1833, the son of Josiah Rhind, a banker in Wick. Perhaps that's where the family money came from. He was educated at Pulteney Town Academy and at Edinburgh University, where he read natural history and natural philosophy. He also attended lectures by Cosmo Innes on Scottish history and antiquities because of his strong personal interest in those subjects. And he was particularly interested in the archaeology of his home county of Caithness, and that's of course one of the reasons for him being well known. In 1851 he opened a number of chambered tombs, including those at Yarrows, and in 1853 he explored the Broch at Kettleburn, the report of which was published in the Archaeological Journal and in the Proceedings of Our Society, Volume 1, the first volume. The Frinds were also presented to the Society, Rhind having been elected a Fellow in 1852. His archaeological interests reached, however, beyond Caithness, and in 1851 he made a long tour of Europe, visiting museums in the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, Austria and Italy. He had intended to proceed to the Scottish Bar, but in 1853 his health forced him to winter in the south of England, and from then on he was only able to visit Sibster, that was his estate in Caithness, in the summer. Every winter he went abroad to Egypt, and in later years to Spain, Algiers, France, Italy and Madeira. In Egypt he conducted researches in the tombs at Thebes and acquired a painted sarcophagus and bilingual papyrus which he gave to the National Museum. In addition, he collected the famous Rhind mathematical papyrus, which is named after him and which I made reference to in my President's letter in the last September newsletter. A treasure which the British Museum bought from Rhind's executors after his death, and which was given a very high profile last year by being included as one of Neil MacGregor's History of the World in 100 Objects. He was an active writer of papers, memoranda and letters. For instance, he wrote an exposition on the law of treasure trove, and he was very keen on the recording of ancient monuments on Ordnance Survey maps, and in advance of his time in that respect. As a well-travelled scholar among the museums of continental Europe, his advice was sought on the arrangement of the Society's collections in the National Museum, and he was made an honorary Fellow of the Society in 1857. He died at Zurich in 1863 at a dreadfully young age of 30, and was taken home to be buried at Wick. Among his many bequests, he left money to create and establish at Wick an institution for the industrial training of orphan girls from certain parishes in the county of Caithness. His services to archaeology had been untiring during his life, and his bequests to the Society on his death were remarkable. He left his library of some 1,600 volumes, a sum of £400 for excavation in northern Scotland, which has probably all been used up by now, and the copyright of his book on Thebes. In addition, having altered his intention to endow a chair of archaeology and history at the University of Edinburgh, he left the residue of his estate at Sibster to the Society to endow the lecture series that still perpetuates his name. And so, since their inception in 1876, the lectures have enabled speakers to explore, and I quote, some branch of archaeology, ethnology, ethnography or allied topic in order to assist in the general advancement of knowledge. So now we come to the 132nd Rhind lecture, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Stuart Needham as our 132nd Rhind lecturer. Stuart has given me a few notes, some very useful notes, and he starts off by saying that there has not been a series covering the Bronze Age for many years in the Rhind lectures, and seemingly never one devoted specifically to the period, and he cites Richard Bradley's 1991-2 Rhind lectures, which cover the monuments of the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. Similarly, Van der Waal's previously in 1982-3 covered the Neolithic and the early Bronze Age of Netherlands and Britain. Joseph Anderson, even before that, in 1882, did lecture on the Bronze Age and the Stone Ages. Stuart says at the beginning of Lecture 1 he shall be featuring on a material link with Rhind himself, that is the battle axe from Breckigo, one of the tombs that he reported on, and it's one of the finds contributing to the patterns discussed in Lecture 3. And then I have some biographical gobbets, which delights me so much to see the use of that term, which is a term which students these days don't seem to recognise, but is very familiar to me as a student. And he says that unlike Martin Carver, last year's Rhind lecturer, he was one of those many archaeologists who knew from a tender age that he wanted to pursue archaeology. He remembers choosing Stonehenge as a subject for a project while still at primary school. Despite the bafflement of his grammar school career as officer, he stuck with the idea and read archaeology at University College Cardiff with Richard Atkinson, of course. However, he came to archaeology from a scientific background with A-levels in physics and mathematics, and continued with physics and math subjects as first-year subsidiaries. So he has a BSc rather than a BA degree, and he has drawn on this knowledge and expertise throughout his career. His undergraduate dissertation on Bronze Age metalwork in Surrey started him off on his first research focus, to be followed by doctoral research, still at Cardiff, on early Bronze Age axe heads, which gets some coverage in these lectures. Before completing his PhD, he was appointed to an extremely apposite job at the British Museum, research assistant on the Bronze Age in the Department of Prehistoric and Romano-British Antiquities, as it then was. He remained there for 30 years, working up the curatorial ranks and diversifying his research bases, although never losing his interest in metalwork. His career included not only various branches of Bronze Age material culture, but also conducting major research excavations for the museum, one at the well-stratified and highly productive site of Runnymede Bridge on the banks of the Thames, and among other things, he used his experience at this site and its environmental context to promote the fledgling subfield of alluvial archaeology. A later excavation campaign was jointly with Canterbury Archaeological Trust, in which they examined the site that yielded the Ringlemere Gold Cup. Stuart's studies of casting moulds have gone hand in hand with those of the actual bronze products and have frequently resulted in new insights. He has also written much about goldwork, including defining an embossed tradition with origins as early as 2000 BC, and that will get mentioned in Lecture 4. He will be known for his repeated clarifications of the chronological structure of Bronze Age metalwork and the Bronze Age in general, and he recently curtailed the Bronze Age by 150 years. Quite an achievement, I think, or perhaps not, it depends on whether you don't want the Bronze Age curtailed. His research led him to the belief that the society and economy of the long accepted final stage of the Bronze Age was so different in so many ways from the preceding stages that it marked a radical departure and needs to be considered within the earliest Iron Age system. Stuart's many research projects largely stem from his in-depth study of artifacts, but he sees this as a means to an end rather than a goal in itself, always seeking to exploit any potential for drawing wider inference. So, for example, an early concern was to show the fickleness of distribution patterns, especially with regard to metalwork, which could theoretically have been recycled to the point of being archaeologically invisible. This and other avenues led to a long-term side interest in the thorny issue of the representativeness of archaeological material, a theme which he will also be talking about this weekend. He has focused on the subject of exchange and how it was conducted in prehistory. He's always been sceptical of trade as a purely economic exercise in the Bronze Age, preferring to see it as embodied within social relations. For his Rhind lectures, Stuart has chosen to give us the culmination of his research focus over the last 12 years on the complex funerary and material culture evidence of the Copper and early Bronze Ages. He embarked on this in earnest during a Leverhulme-funded sabbatical at Cambridge, which resulted in a series of papers on various aspects of the topic, including one defining the concept of cosmologically driven acquisition, published in the Proceedings of the Prehistoric Society in 2000. Another rewrote our understanding of how the beaker culture was introduced to these islands and how it then developed, and that was published in the Proceedings also in 2005. And for that he was awarded the Prehistoric Society's Baggerly Prize, which was fittingly an engraved goblet. This background and the research he undertook in connection with the Ringlemere Cup and its parallels has also led to another new concept, that of maritory, This has nothing to do with today's royal event, I think. It's a concept for helping to explain a set of regular interactions across the waterways of Northern Europe that did not relate to common culture per se, in the territorial sense, but rather to certain common interests and understandings, though non-mercantile ones. And that really whets my appetite. Since retiring from the museum at the end of 2006, Stuart has been undertaking freelance research, a combination of seeing through existing projects and selectively taking on new ones. And much of his recent endeavour has naturally been devoted to working up case studies for this series of lectures and to refining the overarching concept. He's an honorary research fellow of both the University of Reading and the National Museum Wales, with whom he has an active research dialogue. He's a member of the advisory panel for the AHRC-funded Beaker Isotopes project based at Sheffield University, headed by Professor Mike Parker-Pearson, and has been one of the team undertaking a groundbreaking restudy of many of the important artefacts from early Bronze Age graves under the auspices of Birmingham University's Leverhulme-funded project, headed by Professor John Hunter and Dr Anne Woodward. These projects have given him more fuel with which to stoke the furnace of his subject this weekend. What a wonderful curtain raiser to the context and the content of this weekend's lectures, material and spiritual engagements, which starts off this evening with his first lecture on funerary conundrums. Stuart Needham, I invite you to give your first lecture on the Rhind series in 2011.